Okay, I'm just going to show you some sample code that I've pulled out of examples from previous years. It's not 100% complete, but it gives you some idea of what a typical field looks like, and we're going to have to combine this with the Bootstrap version, right? Because there's a component in here that you aren't used to, and then there's a component, and then the Bootstrap itself. I'll merge those two together. I'll try to create a page. Maybe I'll have some time today to do that, to create a page. But what you're looking at here is a very simple text field, okay, number field, a simple text field. And the one thing we haven't had to consider yet, because you're just laying out screens and getting ready to handle new input data, so what you're laying out right now, is how do we use the same form for editing an existing record? Should be able to edit the same or use the same form. And what we've done in the past, there's a couple of ways, there's 3 ways to do this, is check to see. Notice there's this units variable. Where'd that come from? It's been extracted from request. So when we come into this edit form, we send it an array. If it's a brand new record, we send it an empty array. If the array is empty, then this is set fails, and we get the empty string for units, and the text box shows up empty. If, however, the array already has a value in it, then we extract that value and display it in the value property. Right there. Okay, so here I extract it from the array, and then if appropriate, display it. So that's the only real change you need to make to your existing forms, is to extract the data and then add a value clause to your input. Now, obviously, if this is radio buttons or checkboxes, it's subtly different, but not much. But for most number fields, text fields, the date field might be a bit more of a challenge to transfer that over, but it shouldn't be too much. I think I probably have that code someplace. But this is how we do that. Now, go ahead.
Radio buttons, do you use an if statement or a switch or anything?
There's the calendar stuff, so we can probably steal that. I don't know if this form has radio buttons on it. I thought it did. Donation type, there's the radio buttons. Right, and what we do is we grab the donation type, and then if the type matches, then we set the check property. Same thing with the checkbox. If it's true, you set the check property. What's underneath here is how I handle the error marker. Now, I haven't looked, and I will just a second here, look at Justin's, and I think this is going to be a little bit different. But it's the same concept. We're going to have an errors array. If the errors array has an element for this field, that's the field name. So if there's a units in the error array, or units element, then we display the error marker. Not only that, we set the title to match whatever that text is, since we know it exists. And so that's how PHP communicates to a form that there's an error. There's nothing, how do we know it's an error? PHP validation, and for us, PHP validation is down to database checking. Maybe not even that, because I have something else to show you that might be able to alleviate that, so the PHP really doesn't have to do anything. The downside to my solution is it, again, requires JavaScript or jQuery. And without the jQuery on, should we still be able to validate? I think so. But this is the way I'm sending errors back from PHP to the GUI, from PHP to the GUI, saying you need to put an error marker on this field. So for the few fields that we have where that's going to be necessary, I don't think it's going to be very necessary, because most of our errors are going to be handled in HTML5 or by JavaScript. Pardon me? By jQuery, yeah. And as Adam would tell you, when I say jQuery is JavaScript. It's just pre-written modules. It's like Volcker tools, but it's still JavaScript behind the scenes. But it's its own library. So yes, jQuery, JavaScript, preferably jQuery. Okay, so if you need to display an error marker from PHP, This is one way to do it, and we would probably have to tweak that to make it fit the CSS that we have for Bootstrap. Here's what Justin sent me as a typical layout for a field. It's got the whole thing, and you can help me if I put this wrong here. The whole thing is a group. So this is one field. I know this is div, 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 all inside one spot, but this one's got some buttons in it, and you mentioned that one's not necessarily, that's not necessary, right?
You might want to take those out.
Okay, take those out. Do I need the span? Yeah.
And
Okay.
the span could be a div, depending on how we decide we want to do things.
Okay, hang on. All right, so now we got a group. The group is there because of the feedback. Is that the error message?
Yes.
Okay, so the error message gets attached to the group.
Well, it's not the error.
It's not the message, but it's the fact that we could format this to display as an error message.
Right, basically it's saying everything inside this group can change based on stuff inside. Like, because if has feedback means we could change it. If we had a success, it would change everything to green. Where if it
Okay.
was, right, so
Okay.
that's what it.
So here's the label for the phone number. Class control label small, column small 4. I think we should all be using the same class for these. Control label column small 4. That way they're all going to look pretty much the same on every page. And then just some text. And that's not a whole lot different than what I was doing with the label. I gave it a special class so that it would be left aligned or it would be floating and so on. And this is set up for, I don't see it. Where's the div that says that this is horizontal, or is that the whole form?
Oh, that would be in the form.
Okay,
Oh,
so this just follows, no, that's right. This just follows it along, right? What we're looking for is what does one field look like? Okay. Now, again, getting into the other class. This is where we are, right? We're shifting, we're jumping between web data management systems here because as a web data management student, you don't care too much about this. But as a system student, you do, because all of our fields should look pretty similar.
that can go away.
Which can go away. This controls profs.
Yeah, that was me trying to work with the jQuery on dynamically adding fields. So sorry.
I don't know a lot about Bootstrap, but since the hidden is within the class, how would you manipulate it so that like you show the error marker, hide it, or whatever, since it's within the style? It's after glyph icon.
It works the same way.
It's within
This
the
hidden,
class.
we would control using PHP.
Okay.
Okay, we'd either put in the word hidden or we leave it out, right? Because the default is visible, I'm guessing.
Like change the class pretty much.
The way the class would look at that, whether it's hidden or not, and probably decide on how to format it. So that the class and the hidden are kind of tied together. But that's kind of my task, is to tie this now into how do we send data to it? The value simply goes in here, right? You just tack that on the end, value equals. And then this last part here is a span error phone number with the glyph icon, and glyph icon remove does what? Takes it away, or is that the, oh, that's the icon itself.
That's the icon.
Okay.
It's like an X.
And then there's a form control feedback. Is that a style? Must be.
Yeah, that basically says, so that helps with form control, or on the form where it has form or has feedback. That helps tie them together, is my understanding.
Okay.
And I propose we keep those in the span because it's different than everything else, and you can tell that that's the error marker.
I can go along with that.
It's different.
So what goes inside the span? This is just the glyph, right? Basically just displaying a glyph,
Yeah, it's displaying that image. That's it.
but there's no text. So we don't have any error marker here with any text yet. How do we display the error to them?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking.
You can put a div below that, or what I like to do is just put it in the title attribute.
Title of this span.
Yes.
Okay.
Title. Yeah, on the, because that would, when you hover over the X, it would give you.
Which is then very similar to what I was doing up here, right? Because here's my error marker, style, visibility, and then title. So very similar to that. And so when you say put it in the title, where does it appear? On the glyphs title, or it appears on the, if it's in that span, it's just the glyph,
You
right?
can put it on the input.
Like on the end of the text.
I
Like
put it in
inside
the
of
input, and then the title attribute on the input changes from whatever, like, please add your phone number, and it just changes from its default to this display.
What if you put it on the group div?
I don't know, because I've always put it on input, because then no matter where the user hovers, they don't have to hover over the X. You can hover anywhere in that input, and then it'll pop up and say, here's your error. So instead of putting it over the error,
The error marker, which is what I make my users do, is to hover on the error marker to see what's wrong. You can just hover on the input altogether, and it'll tell you what's wrong.
Right.
I think that's something they could learn to do pretty quickly. At least this group of people is pretty trainable, so they can hover over the entire field. What do you do when it's, why would it be? Well, radio buttons would be it's missing, right? That one might have to go onto a field set or something, but if you've got radio buttons, that's something we'll have to sort out.
and we can try what Green said and just put it on
On the group itself,
I just did that because I got this up and running, and I'm using the same code that you're showing. And when you put it on the div, it only shows up when you're on the type, on the label text. When you're on the input field, it doesn't work.
so if you put it on this div out here, the group, it only shows up on the label and not the stuff inside.
No, because the title on the stuff inside overrides it.
What happens if you put it on the innermost div?
You put it where?
On the innermost div?
the input group.
Here.
Yes.
I don't know.
Will that allow you to hover over?
Well, the downside, where I prefer to put it almost is in the ID here, but that doesn't work. Is as close as possible, keep those two error things together. So I would say that the title
It may work. You can try it.
It doesn't work on the div.
on here,
On the input div, does
What,
not work.
what about on the span?
On the span,
is there a title here? There's no title. Why would this title override that title, or does it have something that I don't know about?
on mine, we have titles defined in mine.
For each one. For each input.
For validation and stuff. Yeah, John went a little farther ahead.
Okay, so what you have is for this input, you have a title that says, please enter your phone number in this
Yeah,
format type of thing.
Yes.
Okay. And then, then I can see why it wouldn't work. And if we replace that title with our title, that wouldn't be terrible. So this is where my title code would go. All right, and back to Brittany's question is, where do we get this stuff? This one I still need to cut and paste. But this is the classic example where we have style visibility. That's one way to do it, but now we've got a different way to do it, and that's with the CSS hide, hidden, and visible. Okay, so that should actually be a little simpler. And then the title is the same thing. Okay. Now here I'm echoing the error units, asking that same question twice. And so what somebody came up with last year was a function to do that. Let me see if I can get my way there. And again, I'll make all of this available to you. Sure. These are a couple of functions that were written to check to see if a field has anything in it. If the field exists, this just simply returns this field from that array. If it doesn't exist, it returns the empty string. It's amazing how often we do that. Okay, this is is it jQuery default, or no, that's the Swift. C#, wrong language. The default value or return value or default. It's kind of what this does. Right? Except it gives it so generically that it does even less than that. It simply returns an empty string if it's not there. But because we do that in every single field, does this details first name exist? If it does, then put it in here. Otherwise, give me the empty string. Now what you say instead is field value array field name. So this array name it's probably details. It's often request. Does the details array contain a first name? If it does, then give it to me. But there's no easy way to ask on a field by field basis, does it exist? And for every single input field, and I really ought to get that other file over here so I can see them both at the same time. But for every single input field, we have to ask, is there an existing value? If there is, then use it. If not, use the empty string. Now all we have to say is field value, array name, first name, or field name. And it will return either its value or an empty string. And that's a little shorter than that inline if that we use over and over and over again. We also, somebody wrote a function that takes care of the error marker. Now this would have to be tweaked a little bit. Right, but this is a function and the title was really long. But that does describe what we're doing. In the errors array, does this field exist? If it does, then return visibility true and the title is appropriate.
I would just call that error value to match the.
Yeah, we could shorten it, but they were in long title mode last year or something. I don't remember where this one came from. Otherwise, visibility is hidden. Right, so these are two utility functions that can simplify that. But right now, I'm not sure how well this is going to work because we're looking at the visibility of the glyph is in one place and the title is being attached to something else. All right, so we might not be able to use this function, but we probably could use something like this. Okay. Does this field exist? If it does, give me its error message, otherwise send me nothing. So those are just a couple of utility functions to simplify using the same form for both editing and new records. Because in order to make that work, you have to send it an array, either an empty array or an array full of values. And for every single field, you've got to figure out whether that value exists or doesn't. So this should simplify that a little bit. The other thing I promised to talk to you about today is what the cases look like for most programs, or for most tables, I should say. So here, this is my sample table. In most CRUD type systems, you're first going to create some kind of a list. So if this was books, this would generate a list of books that I can choose from to edit. It's kind of like if we go back to C#, remember we had our selection grid on the left-hand side of the screen. Here's your list. Which one of these do you want to edit? Now the way I have this set up is that the list is in one page and the edit is another page. And putting them side by side gets difficult. But here's a list to choose from. So we would have something, here's a list of campers. Which camper do you want to mess with? We pick them. When you generate a list, you first have to get that data from the database. Here's a list of books. And then include it in the appropriate view. If somebody then says, I want to edit one of those books, set the error markers to nothing. And notice I set the details. So here I'm going into the database and I'm getting the record with this ID number. So and this is what we're going to learn about on Wednesday. Okay, I'm going to take you into Unit 6. We're going to start connecting to a database. Some of you are getting anxious, I think. You want to save the data that you have, but you also want to extract or bring in new data. So if somebody says edit, this would somehow return via the request array an ID number. I want the details for this record. And sometimes this getting details is 2, 3, 4 because we're going to 3 different tables to get this stuff. Sometimes. And then we show the edit form, but we send in this details array, and I call it details, and I think you all should. The details array contains the current record. Notice down here when I'm doing a new one, the details array is empty. This is the errors array. It's empty. A little later, the error array gets filled in. But if I'm editing an existing record, there are no errors, and I want to make sure there's nothing left over. If I'm creating a new record, there's no errors to start with. I want to make sure that the errors array is empty. But notice that both of these go to the same form. They just send in different errors and different details. So those are very common. Then there are two cases, update and save new. Basically what we're doing here is splitting up those requirements. If the new event, when I'm saving a new one, I send back a save new. When this form is done, I send back an update request, an action of update versus save new. So here's my update, save new. First thing we've got to figure out is which button it was. Most of those forms, Justin's already got 2, 3 buttons. How many you got on yours? 2, a clear and a save.
Yeah. So
Okay. There's a clear and there's a save, but there should be a cancel button to go back to wherever I was before. I changed my mind. I don't want to edit this. Which is different than clear. Clear takes the data and resets it, basically. Versus cancel, which says take me back. So here's my reset button. There's a delete button if we have them on a record. This is the record. I want to delete this record. It's 2 ways to do delete. I make you go in and look at the record, study it, and then there's a delete button there and you can delete it. The other way is on the list. Here's all my books. Put a little delete button next to it and say delete that book. To me, that's too easy. Make them go look at it. And that's if we're deleting. There may not be a whole lot of delete buttons on our forms. So we don't want to delete a whole lot of data.
I think that things become inactive in this more than anything.
Yes, but occasionally you enter somebody and you go, whoops, I shouldn't have even entered this person and I want to delete them. There's maybe I create a registration and go, whoops, I shouldn't have even entered this, delete it. Because if you don't have a way to delete something that isn't chained together, it could be difficult.
Why can't you just cancel?
Because you already said.
Because cancel means I change my mind, I don't want to edit this record, versus delete means I want the record to go away. Reset said put it back to what it was when it came in. Okay. And then there's a save button. And if it's the save button, then I got to figure out, is it a new record or is it an existing record? And I just call, oh, that's nice typing. I just call the appropriate method in the business class to either save it or insert it. The 2 different things. Saving it is an update, basically. And insert is add a new record. It takes different commands. You know that in SQL. I can update with an update command. If I want to add a new record, it takes an insert command. Other than that, the save new and the save original are not that different. Notice these are all identical. Deleting is the same thing. Deleting, if it's a new record, is the same as cancel. And I think my delete buttons are actually, if it's new, there is no delete button. It doesn't even show up. So what do we do with this? What I would like you to do is, for each one of your responsibilities, whatever you're working on right now, create a cases file that looks very similar to this. You bring in your table, the model file from that, and it would be an S because we're using models this year. And then you have the list, the edit, the new, the update, save, inside there, each one of these. But instead of these header commands, I'll leave them there, but instead of these header commands, just put in an echo. It says you requested a save. Or just echo the current action. Might be enough. Just so you know that you've gone there, and then in the future we can replace it with real code once we get the database component out. So what I envision here for next Monday, I'm in systems class now. For next Monday, what I envision is a little bit of navigation. That you bring up your form from a list, potentially, that has a new button on it. Where'd the list come from? Well, we don't know. I have to think about this a little bit more. But at least your form that you have right now, when you click the save button, delete button, the cancel button, the reset button, should do something, if nothing more than just echo on the screen that you said save. And then in the future, we'll figure out what code do we actually put in there to do the save. But for right now, just put in some placeholders so that we know this is where it goes and we have this typical navigation back and forth. Questions? Okay. And the last thing I want to show you is a little piece of code that I found that allows me to, and I don't know, oh, it's because it's a bad extension, that allows me to send a signal to the database saying, give me some data, or in this case, it says delete a record, without me leaving the form. If we go back to these sample cases, everything we do, every button we click, leaves the form, goes back to the server, does whatever we said we wanted to have done, and then brings back the next view. So there's always this cycle. Here's a list. I click on a book. It takes me to the book edit form. I click save. It takes me back to the list. Every one of those does the same kind of stuff. There's a lot of back and forth. And for some of our things, the only thing we cannot do using HTML5 for validation is check for a duplicate record. So what I'm kind of hoping is that we can use this asynchronous code to tell the database to run its check for duplicate record query. We send it whatever data it needs to do a duplicate record check, the logical keys. If there's a duplicate record, it sends back a true. If it isn't, it sends back a false. And the JavaScript, this function then decides whether to put an error marker on, where to put the error marker. The downside is this has to be done. There is no way to communicate with the server using HTML5. Neil, you sent me some stuff that sounded like it might be good, but it was actually the other way. It's the server sending a signal to a page that already exists, but the page has to exist. There's no way to have the page call back to the server and say, do this little bit of PHP from HTML5 that I can tell. Okay. So we have to use JavaScript to do this, but I think that's a good way for us to do it so that our page is a little more efficient. Instead of going all the way back to the server with all of our data and saying, here's what the user wants. Save it, then find out, nope, there's a duplicate record. Take all that data, send it back. Again, we'll just sit there and see if we can make this work. And once you have a little more experience communicating with the database, I'll try to get this going so that we can send a signal to the database. But basically what we're saying is we're sending an XML HTTP request. That's basically an asynchronous call. Okay. Getting it ready. This is a function that says, what do we do when it's done? Notice its location. It comes after the request. So this is instantiating an XML request. I'm going to do it. Here's what you do when you're done. Okay. And here is the PHP that you call to actually do the delete. And when they come back, we can give them information. This ready state 4 status 200 basically says the connection is there and we've communicated. Down underneath here is just some PHP. This is what you're going to learn about on Wednesday. It says, here's my query. Select the first name, last name from employees, inner joined. I haven't tried using, so I'm guessing they should work. On payroll, where the bank ID equals, this is a parameter. The bank ID that was sent to me probably is a parameter. Somehow this gets sent. There it is. This translates what got sent into a parameter. It gets plugged into there. This is a security conscious type thing. You cannot do a SQL insertion here to override and get a free list of user IDs and passwords and stuff. This prevents that. So it's a security thing we'll talk more about on Wednesday. But we prepare the query, we put in the parameter into here, then we execute it, we get all the data. If the results is greater than 0, then we say, here's the stuff. And we delete, in this case. But we're not looking for delete. We're looking for this to send back a true or false. And we can do that by filling in the results variable and then looking for it on the server side, or on the client side. So this is a piece of code, and all of this I will plop up on OneDrive along with all the key press events and stuff I've already thrown up there as sample pieces of code that you can grab and use that to develop your fields. Questions? If you develop other utilities, particularly like these sample here that said check to see if this works, check to see if it works. that would make our forms a little easier that you think everybody else might be able to use, please share. The downside of having 3 teams here is sometimes you develop utilities the other teams could use. But if you share them with me, then I can pass them on and somebody can use them and we can throw them into a utilities library. I used to have one of those, of utilities that would come in very handy. Other comments, questions? Okay, this is all going to be saved to the recording. I'm going to put it up under Unit 6 because it is related to getting data out of the database and showing it on the screen. So this is kind of an overview of what we're going to do in Unit 6. But on Wednesday, we'll start with the actual lecture, with the sample code to learn how to connect to a database, get data from the database, send data to the database, all the standard SQL query type of stuff that we normally do. But all of this is a good overview for that because these cases show you the kinds of things we typically have to work with. And this is my solution for all the common buttons, and even the save button just goes to 2 different places to save. But notice here's the validation. That might go away. Questions? Thanks for verbalizing that. All right, so you got about an hour. What I would like you were collaborating a lot before I got here. Just keep it up. What I would like to do at 4 o'clock at the beginning of systems is Reen and Paul, your group, come up, show us what you got so far. That's all I want to see. Okay. Bring it on a flash drive or email it to me and I'll pop it up into brackets or however we want to deal with it. And then, I don't know if I got to give you guys names here, but we call it Patrick's group today. I promise to change that over to the next day. Have you go second, and then Harold and the Brittany and Neil group can go third and show us what you got. Right. What I will be asking you to do, and this is a little bit of Agile, but just focus philosophy more than anything else, is once you're done showing us what you got, my first question will be, all right, where are you going to be on Monday? Where are you going to be on Monday so that we can start hopefully tying some of these things together? Really all I'm looking for, my assignment to you for Monday, what I'm really looking for is for you to have a cases file. Have a cases file that we could tie into and actually see your form, click some buttons, and see that it recognizes that those buttons have been clicked.